Imagine this. A company says it has a battery so weird, so fast, so heat tolerant that the internet starts whispering, "That's not a battery. That's a supercapacitor in cosplay." And now, the whole argument comes down to something hilariously unsexy. Leave it sitting there for 10 days. That's the new battlefield. Not drag racing, not a giant fireball, not some chrome-plated future demo. Just, does it keep its charge when nobody touches it? Because that accusation matters. If this thing were really acting like a supercapacitor, that would be a very different story for an electric vehicle. Great power, sure, but leave it parked for a while and suddenly your miracle battery starts looking like a very expensive attention span problem. So Donut Lab took that accusation to VTT, the Finnish lab that's been running these third-party tests, and asked a simple question. If this is secretly a supercap, does the self-discharge give it away? And the answer is interesting, but not in the way hype wants it to be. Because the big lesson here is not just about one battery. It's about how a graph can hypnotize people. A scary voltage drop can look like disaster. A flat line can look like proof. And both can fool you if you don't know what the test actually measured. This one is a perfect reality filter episode because the result is real, the argument is messy, and the truth lives in the boring details people keep skipping. And that, my friends, is where the good stuff hides.
Chapter 1. The test everyone is misreading. Let's start with what VTT actually did, because this is where half the internet trips over its own shoelaces. This report is a self-discharge test on one cell, DL1, out of 3 visually identical cells labeled DL1, DL2, and DL3. And the report is careful about scope. This is a customer-supplied device which the customer identified as a solid-state battery cell. That sentence matters. It means VTT is independently testing performance under a protocol. It does not mean this report is a chemistry confession booth. It does not mean the lab cracked it open and certified every internal claim under the sun. What they did first was a baseline capacity test at room-ish temperature. Then for the self-discharge test, they charged the cell in 2 stages to about 50% state of charge, about half full, not topped off to the ceiling. Then they let it sit for 240 hours, which is 10 days, at ambient conditions in a fume hood while logging voltage every 10 seconds. After the 10 days, they discharged it and measured how much charge was still recoverable. That is the actual receipt, not vibes, not "the curve looked calm," not "Marco said trust me, bro." The number. They charged 13.335 amp hours into the cell for that storage test. After 10 days, they got 13.029 amp hours back out. That is 97.7% of the charged capacity still recoverable after 240 hours. That is the headline. And it's funny because it's such a boring headline. No fireworks, no dramatic collapse, no superhero landing. Just a very stubborn little number saying, "No, I mostly stayed here." That matters because if you're trying to kill the "it's actually a supercapacitor" theory, boring is good. Boring is exactly what you want. The test also says there was no visible damage or changes to the cell afterward. So on the narrow question of, does this thing dump charge like a leaky supercap over 10 days at room temperature around half state of charge? The result is a solid hit for Team Battery. But narrow is the key word. This is a narrow win. And narrow wins are how you stay honest. Chapter 2. The Voltage Trap.
Now for the part everybody is going to stare at first, the voltage graph.
And this is where people get baited. The table shows the cell voltage at the start of the idle period was 3,861 millivolts. 10 seconds later, it was already down to 3,801. At 1 minute, it was 3,778. At 1 hour, it was 3,758. At 10 hours, it was 3,745. And after the full 240 hours, it was 3,733. So yes, if you squint dramatically and cue ominous music, you can point at that early drop and go, aha, it's bleeding out. Except that's almost certainly the wrong movie, because the first steep drop looks much more like voltage relaxation than true long-term self-discharge. That sounds fancy, but the idea is simple. When you stop charging a battery, the terminal voltage snaps down from its just charged state toward its resting state. That does not mean the stored charge vanished in 10 seconds. It means the battery is settling down and acting like a battery instead of posing for a photo. This is the trap. People confuse three different things all the time: voltage relaxation, true self-discharge, and real-world pack drain from electronics and systems wrapped around the cell. This VTT test is really about the middle one, not the first one alone, and definitely not the whole vehicle story. And Donut's own transcript leans into this by saying the voltage stabilizes within about 10 hours, then levels off for the next 9.5 days. That's actually the smart way to describe the curve, because after that initial settling, the remaining drift is much smaller. So the real proof here is not the line stayed flat enough for my emotions. The real proof is that after 10 days, the recoverable capacity was still 97.7% of what had been charged in for the storage test. That's the court admissible part. A graph can flirt with your brain. Capacity is the witness statement. And this is also why the 50% state of charge choice became its own mini-drama online. Some critics say, convenient, they only used half charge because a fuller battery would show a more dramatic early drop. Could that change the shape of the early voltage relaxation? Sure, possibly, but it does not magically invalidate the test they actually ran. It just means the claim has a box around it. And the box says, about 50% state of charge, ambient temperature, 10 days, 1 cell, cell level test. Stay inside that box and the result is pretty clean. Step outside it and you're improvising. Chapter 3. Is it really not a supercapacitor? So, does this test prove it is not a supercapacitor? Here's the careful answer. It strongly supports battery-like behavior under this test, and it cuts against the caricature of a device that would dump charge in a much more obvious way over 10 idle days. That is not nothing. That is the point of the test. But I would still phrase it like an adult, not like a marketing goblin. I would say, this result is consistent with a battery and inconsistent with the specific, it's secretly just a supercap accusation Donut wanted to answer. That is cleaner than saying one 10-day room temperature test solved the entire identity crisis forever. Because this report does not independently certify chemistry. It does not prove no liquid electrolyte. It does not tell us energy density. It does not tell us cycle life. It does not tell us how the cell behaves after months of storage. And it does not tell us how it behaves at high state of charge or high temperature, which are exactly the places batteries tend to get more grumpy. So the internet split makes perfect sense. One camp says, congrats, your battery behaves like a battery. Honestly, fair joke. The other camp says, see, supercap theory buried. Also directionally fair, on the narrow question this test was built to hit. My verdict is more annoying, which usually means it's closer to reality. This test does support the narrow claim. It does not settle the bigger war.
And that's the recurring donut story right now, isn't it? They keep stacking narrow wins. Fast charging, hot discharge, now self-discharge. Each one says, okay, there's something real here. And each one also leaves the same giant empty chairs in the room. Show me density. Show me lifetime. Show me the hard mode repeats. Because a battery startup can die two very different deaths. One dies because the thing never worked. The other dies because the thing worked just well enough to generate mythology before the ugly scaling questions arrived. And those ugly questions always arrive. They have great attendance.
Chapter 4: The Missing Receipts.
So what are the missing receipts? Three obvious ones. First, run the same self-discharge test at higher states of charge. 80%, 100%. Because half full is not the same stress case as topped off. Second, run it hotter. Room temperature is nice. Reality is rude. If you want people to stop arguing, show storage behavior at elevated temperatures where self-discharge gets nastier and excuses get thinner. Third, run it longer and run it across more cells. 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. DL1, DL2, DL3. Give us variance, not vibes. Because right now, the test is useful, but it's not the final boss. It's more like a solid side quest, with good loot. And that still matters. The reason this episode is worth making is not that Donut finally destroyed every skeptic. They didn't. It's that this is how you stop a single graph from turning into a religion. You ask, what was tested? What was measured? What was assumed? What is still missing? And if you do that here, the answer is pretty clean. VTT measured a real self-discharge result. The cell kept 97.7% of the charged capacity over 10 days at ambient conditions around half state of charge. The early scary voltage drop is not the whole story. The end of test capacity measurement is the story. That's a meaningful receipt. It is also not a chemistry certificate, not a pack simulation, not a lifetime guarantee, and not a coronation. So the honest ending is this. Interesting? Yes. Decisive? Narrowly. Complete? Not even close. And that's fine, because reality is allowed to be less cinematic than the comment section. Signal over hype. Subscribe to join the expedition.